Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the GDC Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis here. I've got the games going a little bit loud there, so your ears may have popped slightly at home. Sorry about that. Turn down the volume. Welcome again to the GDC Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis. I am a community manager at GDC and a contributing editor at GammaSutra.com. What you are watching in front of you is a game called Mutant Year Zero: Road to Eden. It is a game about the life and legend of one talking duck named Ducks and his pig friend. I'm forgetting the pig friend's name. Could one of our guests in Sweden... I missed that. One more time?
Borman,
right. Yeah. Ducks, The Adventures of Ducks and Borman, as they it's like Frog and Toad, as they talk about life's mysteries, life's great delights. Or if you're actually a person who knows what this game is, it's a strategy RPG from the developers at the Bearded Lady Consulting, 3 members of which are down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Lee, could you introduce yourself just to get us started?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lee, and I'm the game director. And also the lead level designer, you could say. Probably the lead artist as well.
Oh, yeah. Costello is going to have no objections to that.
Lee, who has joined you today on our mysterious adventure through a post-apocalyptic wasteland?
So we have Callie, our real lead artist,
Mm-hmm.
and technical artist and animator, and David, who is the co-director of the project, and the technical director and the lead programmer, and yeah.
We're a small crew, so we have many hats.
Yeah. Callie and David, thank you also for joining us. If you're watching from home, if you're like me in California, it's very early. If you're on the West Coast, thank you for joining us so early. If you're in chat and you're from elsewhere in the world, well, thank you for joining anyway, even if it's not as early. This is a Q&A stream. Just a full disclosure, the footage you are seeing in front of you is from, I'm told, an older demo of the game. And so you might see a couple hiccups like that one that just came by. And it's pre-recorded footage, so unfortunately you can't yell at me when I screw up, which you're going to watch me screw up because you don't need to be good at video games sometimes to do this job. You just need to be able to make the shooty bang bang happen. To get things started, we're also going to point out this is a game where we're talking about this from GDC. At GDC, we like talking to interesting game developers, which most of them are interesting. It's just a question of how interesting. That was meaner than I intended. We are here talking about how games get made. We are here talking about how sometimes games get marketed or the process of running a small studio. This is what we're going to be talking about today. If you have questions about sort of nitty-gritty things about the game from a perspective of playing it, we'll try to work it in, but if you're in chat, please ask questions for these fine folks. They have answers for you about making strategy games, stealth games, and all kinds of other fun stuff. To get things started, Lee, David, and Cal, would you mind explaining, Callie, would you mind explaining what your background is on the project? And I know this is an adaptation of a Swedish pen and paper RPG. Would you mind explaining how this game got started and how you settled on like the vision of where this game would go?
You or me?
Yeah, I think it's more. I think David was the original one who started the project.
David, yeah, let's hear your take.
So Lee is British, so he didn't grow up with this, but me and Kella did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a long time coming. It's actually something we wanted to do about 8 years ago, 8 years ago. We started looking at making this game, but we were not experienced enough, and we didn't have the manpower or the muscle to do it. So it's been a long time dream to get to do it, and then I don't know, 3 years ago or something like that, we started up. I just played XCOM again on Iron Man and decided that the world could need a little bit more of that genre. So that was kind of it was something we were looking at already 7-8 years ago, making some sort of turn-based tactical game out of it, because we figured that would be what would suit the RPG well and the size of our studio. So yeah, I called Kalle up, and I just quit my job at IO to do this kind of thing. And I was lucky enough that Kalle was also kind of in the middle of things, and we started making prototypes 3 years ago, and then got Lee on board half a year later or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about that. I remember it quite well because I was still working at IO at the time. I was the lead level designer for Hitman Season 1. And David gave me a call. He was, Lee, do you want to meet up in a bar in Copenhagen? I've got something to show you. See if you would be interested. So I thought, yeah, okay. So went down to the bar and we had a beer. And David had this iPad with him with some videos on showing the original prototype for the game. Looks a little bit different from what you see now, but mechanically quite similar. And he just said to me, Lee, do you want in on this? Putting a team together to build it. So I went to the bathroom. I just stood there and I looked in the mirror and I thought, that looks like a lot of fun. So I just came back out and just slapped my hands together and said, yes, let's do this.
Yeah, he makes quick decisions. And I think the original pitch was something like, well, I grew up with this, I'm going to put a lot of heart into it, and then I wanted to feel like when I was playing in the woods when I was a kid, coming across old abandoned houses, and that was kind of the direction, and then let's go from there.
Oh, that's actually that's so
everything else out.
that's so cool. So was it kind of like, I mean, not to ask too much about your childhood, but oh dang it, unfortunately, chat's having a harder time hearing you guys, which is something I still don't fully.
Is it the mic or the stream?
It's a little bit. It's because I can hear you all just fine. Unfortunately, we've been having a thing where sometimes the Skype audio is not coming through on XSplit very well. So, trying to figure out if I can change anything over here. Could you talk for me real quick? Sorry to.
Yeah, so let's continue where we were then.
I guess I'll just ask the question. You guys can rattle while I poke buttons. Really quick. So were you, as a kid, David, did you kind of like play the tabletop RPG and then like kind of go out in the woods and just kind of imagine yourself on these adventures just like the characters are right now? That's kind of a personal question, but it's kind of fascinating.
That's okay, because that's more or less it. Because I played this, the pen and paper role-playing game came out in 82 or 83 or something. I didn't play it then, I'm not that old. But I played it when I was 10 or 11 or something the first time, so it was probably around the same time I would be, imagining things while playing in the woods. So yeah, it was a big part of my childhood, which was just a good a good starting point to get going with it, I think.
How did you? I mean, it's kind of like if tabletop RPGs are sort of nice because you can do anything, and obviously you had XCOM in your head as a format. But how did you sort of move it from? You had those two. You had XCOM and you had this childhood experience, and how did you sort of move it into what we're looking at right now?
Well, I built most of the game world, and it started. I didn't have that much experience with Mutant before I started on the project, because most of the Mutant role-playing games were all in Swedish since the 80s. And it's only recently it had been translated into English for Mutant Year Zero. So I sat down with all the material that I could get hold of, the books, the expansion books, all the stuff available in English, and just went through it all with a fine-tooth comb. And then tried to craft the world that you see now based on the images I was getting in my head as I was reading the books and as I was imagining how these sessions play out, and the kind of feel and the dark humor, but the touch of seriousness to everything. And
yeah, that was kind of on the world plane. And it was really nice. That was something me and Kalle said early on. Kalle was really worried that it would become too Swedish, the game, if we made it with all our backgrounds. So it was great to have somebody from the outside come in and kind of rediscover it, right? And then when it came to the gameplay, I think quite early we said we're going to skip the parts that the pen and paper will do really well. It's the social interactions and all the stuff you get from the pen and paper. We could never do that as well in a game. So we figured we'll focus on the combat and see if we can tell some sort of story in a different fashion in this game world.
Right on. I'm going to bastardize a question from Steak Applebeats here because, like I said, we're trying to keep this a game developer focus. Steak Applebeats would like to know how many playable characters will be available at launch and will more be added later on. And I'll guess. I know in a game like this, with a game that has permadeath, with characters that can leave if you don't resurrect them fast enough. What was the design decision, the thinking behind that, implementing that in a game as opposed to sort of doing a fixed party of characters, something more like Pillars of Eternity, which is another tabletop inspired like RPG like this?
Well, when we first started out the original prototypes, we did have unlimited amount of characters that you could recruit in the arc, and a very XCOM style gameplay where it was more about recruit management, things like that. But the problem is, as the characters that we have started to evolve, and as the story of the game evolved, it would get into the point where, especially Bauman and Dux and some of the other guys had such strong personalities and such strong visual identity that we were struggling with the idea of having 4 Baumans on the battlefield and things like that. It wasn't really working anymore. So we had this conflict of the gameplay was starting to conflict with the game's narrative and identity a little bit. So we took the call to basically concentrate on the characters, so the characters don't become just blank recruits, and they have their own identities, they have their own personalities, and really hammer on that side instead.
Right on. That's
yeah, and I guess we can answer the first question now as well, right?
Yeah, are we allowed to say how many?
I'm not sure. Are we?
Oh. Yeah. Well, you start off with Bauman and Dux, and all we can say is that you start off with Bauman and Dux, and as you explore the zone, you will find some other mutants who can join your party.
Yeah, we're not certain. We need to make a call to marketing. We're not certain if we're allowed to say how many will be in the initial game. But the plan is, to add characters to this further down the line, for sure. We want to keep this world.
Yeah, Lee and David, since you came from IO, I guess you have experience like not just making a stealth slash tactical game. It's also a game that you're used to making as a live game. What do you think were some of the changes that you sort of thought about in your game dev process for making sure that you could update this game down the line and sort of make it not necessarily like fully live, but more live than I think RPG developers were used to in the past? I think a lot of players are expecting more frequent updates these days.
Yeah, we should say we didn't.
Oh.
To be completely honest, we made sure that we didn't go out of our bounds. Early on, we were looking at things like generating a huge world, making it streaming, and we realized that it would probably not be the greatest use of our time in the end. We would rather make sure that the combat is fun and the stealth works. So we decided to split it up into more of zones, a map where you go exploring and you switch out of real time and tactical, as you're seeing on screen. And then that's one kind of contained area with one story. That way it makes it easier for us to expand on this further down the line without having to maybe, think about too many other things that will interlock with it, so to speak, if we were to open an area in an open world or anything like that. So that was one of the things, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me as well, when we were experimenting early in the project, we came to the conclusion quite quickly that randomly generated maps you can get a lot of content. If you randomly generate maps, you can get almost unlimited content. But the problem is it quality content? Because if you handcraft a map, you can go so much deeper with the environmental storytelling, with the little touches in the game world, the visual side of it, the lighting, the effects. You can get such a higher quality level on the maps rather than just randomly generating.
Right on.
What else? Actually, I'm sure there are things we thought about that can't come up with now.
Oh, it's fine.
Like when it comes to the character systems and spawners and things, right?
Yeah.
Um,
What engine? I'm curious. What engine is this game running in, and sort of how long does it take to take an interesting idea for whether it's an area or a story beat, and how long does it take to implement it content wise?
so it's Unreal 4,
Mm-hmm.
and oof.
I think for maps, because we modularize as much as possible
Mm-hmm.
in the game's assets. I can get a map up and not finished, but just up and running so that we can play it within about a week. And then, yeah, then once the map is up and running, then we iterate very heavily on the layout and on the how the gameplay feel
Mm-hmm.
for a few weeks, and then after that it goes into what we call layering.
Mm-hmm.
We layer on the graphics, and then that just continues and continues until it's to this kind of quality that you see now.
Yeah, it's been rather quick the last few ones, but it's always a hard question, right? Where we'll almost have to do a postmortem, look at a few submits to time those last levels,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because of course it's gotten quicker, but some of them have been iterated, for a long time to make sure that any changes to gameplay has to be reflected in level design, for instance.
What do you think changed, like from your team's experience level? Because obviously, like you said, you're a small team, and it's not like you can throw it's not Ubisoft where you can throw 1,000 Ubisofts at it to fix any given problem. What do you think your team learned from those first levels to the later levels that sped up your process?
Yeah, that's hard to. I would say basically layout for tactical games
Mm-hmm.
was surprisingly took a long time to nail, like cover positions and high ground positions, and especially when you got the mechanical side of the game is being developed at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So stealth and what numbers are involved in stealth, and then how the distance for weapons firing and things like this.
Yeah, I remember quite early going.
Yeah.
I didn't think, because they actually said we've made stealth games, but
Yeah.
we've never made an XCOM
Mm-hmm.
clone before, right? So it was one of the things I remember leasing. It wasn't early, but maybe half a year into it, where you realize that like the combat, the maps, the turn-based it needs quite a bit of space.
Yeah.
Way more than we actually we were planning for initially. So our first couple of maps, once we started putting enough into them, became too cramped.
Yeah,
basically.
really crammed and claustrophobic feeling. So we learned that, we kind of learned what a small map is and what a large map is in
Mm-hmm.
this game.
And then we quite early, so it's completely tile based, right? So we made sure that everything worked within that system, and we were actually kind of generating ground and everything around it for a while. And well, we learned that that's like Lee said, it doesn't. We can't create the quality with that type of system.
Mm-hmm.
But if I should say one thing for the developers out there, Cal and me made a choice early on, if you want to make an XCOM clone, to put the data on the edges rather than on the grid points.
Mm-hmm.
Do not do that. That's come back to haunt us quite a bit. Yeah. It complicates things when you can come, like you could have so when you have corners, for instance, right? That's a complicated setup all of a sudden, where if you just had a specific corner tile, like metadata that said it was a corner, you could treat it as such right away. Now we were a little bit too free with what we could do, so you can make T-junction setups and all
Mm-hmm.
that, because we were putting everything on our edges. So I wouldn't do that again, I think.
Yeah. Callie, Callie, I want to give you some time to have some fun here. Callie, I'm curious. This is a small team. This is a small company, and I think something that I didn't understand until I started talking to game developers was that everything you look at in a game takes time to make, and what we're just this one house and layout area we're looking at right now is way more time than I could have ever imagined. I'd say 3 or 4 years ago. What do you think helps you and your colleagues out being able to make assets for a handcrafted level, like handcrafted levels as opposed to procedural levels? How are you able to do it efficiently and make things so that a small team could manage it?
It's probably I mean, a combination of Unreal being pretty flexible and also, I mean, we have been using outsourcing quite a lot. One of our first recruits was actually an outsourcing manager and artist. So, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that was key to get some help as a small studio, so we knew we could get that help. But then in the end, when it comes to the characters and stuff, I mean, it has been a little bit has been outsourced, but mostly done in house.
Yeah, like when it comes to the levels, it has been done in house. Basically everything, only props has been outsourced, I guess.
I think one thing technically as well that helped a little bit is that we didn't go with any baked lighting for the game. It was mostly outdoors. It wouldn't really bring up the fidelity maybe that much anyway, but it was a choice early on, mostly actually from a production standpoint, because, you know, relighting levels, whenever we do something, would have been too much for us.
Right on.
And it's a case of making smart decisions as well. It's like looking at your team and who you have on the team and what they're strong in. It's like for the main story beats, we use these, as you see now, these 2D cutscenes. It's because we have a member of the team who is an amazingly good 2D artist. He's actually a traditional painter. So it's like, okay, well, we have someone who's crazy good at 2D art, so we should use that.
Yeah, exactly. Leverage what you have.
Got, yeah. Leverage your strengths.
Which artist is that, by the way? We should credit them for the great art we're looking at right now.
Oscar Bodine.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Oscar did a good job on these, I think. What made you all make? I played another stealth tactical game earlier this year called Phantom Doctrine. That was really good. I liked it a lot. But it could be kind of a slower game because even though it was a stealth game that also had, you know, XCOM combat, they did a turn-based stealth thing, which was fun, but also, like I said, it took a while. How it seems like you guys have more experience with making stealth games than making XCOM games. But what was your sort of guiding philosophy for doing stealth in this kind of setting? And knowing that players would probably want to barge into combat anyway, given the you know it's an XCOM game. You move units and you shoot things.
Yeah, quite early on, from almost day one, we made the decision that we wanted to keep the stealth aspect as simple as we possibly could. A reason for that was we didn't want the players spending any more time there than we needed to kind of tell the story and let you explore the world, because what we wanted you to do was to do the stealth moments or you know, set up for combat while you're in real time, so we could speed it up a little bit. But if we started adding too much functionality to that, it would slow it down again, right? So we made a decision very early on that we wanted to keep the amount of game mechanics that you can utilize in the real time to a minimum and keep it very, very simple. So that's shown, for instance, in the attention circles that we use rather than any vision cones or anything like that. We didn't want people trying to sneak on a corner too much and spend too much time doing that.
Yeah, because I assume the vision circles make it easier to let the player know, hey, this is where they notice you and this is where they don't, as opposed to like nitty gritty Hitman style trying to, you know, keep at the corner of an NPC's vision or something.
Yeah, exactly. That was the choice. It was either that or, you know, giving them, whenever you get discovered, you get a little bit of leeway times, as we would have done in Hitman, for instance.
Yeah.
You would, you know, the guy would come over and investigate, but that gave us other problems, right, for balancing the game. So that was quite early a decision.
Yeah.
That we don't put anything extra that we didn't need into the real time. And as you can see, the attention circles here now are like, as long as you stay out of them, you have the advantage, right?
Yeah.
And that communicates very, very clearly.
I really like the little red highlights that come up as you get close to them. Like kind of this, like, you know, it's almost like it's like a stove that's too warm.
Yeah, I think that was, the idea was that this should be a tense moment, but you shouldn't feel stressed about it, so to speak. You should feel that you have the time to check out the guy coming in, on a patrol here and see what's behind him, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Before setting up. And then if it were vision cone based, for instance, that vision cone might just bam come all of a sudden as he steps in behind from behind a building or a car or something, right?
We didn't want to make it too skill based, basically. When you sneak around, it should be more about making a tactical decision rather than being stressed and making quick decisions.
Yeah.
For instance, you should have climbed the roof of the petrol station here.
Oh well, you know.
Yeah, it was always a desire that we wanted the stealth to not be Twitch gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Because the game isn't Twitch gameplay, all the game is very much about planning and making good tactical decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the stealth had to feel like it was feeding that quite well.
Mm-hmm.
So the stealth in this game is much more about you finding good positions and working out maybe there's someone who's isolated who I can pull down without anybody else seeing. And
yeah, that's what's happening. If we're watching the footage right now, that's actually what's happened. Like I was surprised to discover this, that you could just sort of sneak your characters around and pick off the isolated enemies. That's really nifty. Like that's something XCOM doesn't have, because once combat starts in XCOM, combat starts. Like there's no more sneaking around the level. Is there anything in particular you had to set up to make sure that like players could figure out that they could do this kind of thing, so that they didn't just barge into combat every time?
I mean, the very start of the game that you're just seeing now is very much designed to be a gentle introduction to stealth. So some extremely obvious patrols of guys with low health walking around on their own, and it's not very taxing, it's not very challenging. It's and the characters, when they talk, they're heavily hinting at least 2 or 3 times that we should investigate who's here and we should sneak around first. And so I would say the first 20 minutes of the game is gently kind of pushing the player into this kind of play style, rather than us hitting them with a hammer. If that makes sense.
When was it useful to hit players with a hammer, though?
Well, that would be the tutorial screen, I guess. Actually, it is a good one, because we had in user research about a month ago or something, it was one of the things that we probably didn't communicate enough. We have added some tutorial messages around this, because if you don't figure it out rather quickly, the levels can become quite hard later down the line, because we really wanted you to scout out these positions. You don't always have to pick up everybody around the map, but at least figure out that they're there. Or when more advanced units step into the field that can help other units and such, it's very important that you know about these units, or they will surprise you.
Yeah, it was also important that the stealth doesn't become boring in the game, because this pattern that you're doing now, you repeat that too much, it will start becoming stale. So when the game's balancing, the enemies, they get harder the further into the zone you get, and the enemy's health will slowly start to track ahead of your stealth weapons. So at some point in the game, you're going to start having to use multiple characters with stealth weapons to kill an enemy, or make use of your mutations that allow you to do double damage or crit damage and stuff like that to be able to pull off a stealth kill.
Yeah, it was actually balanced quite. So it's actually now you're out of combat, but of course we have a critical hit and a regular one, and that's the balance you were talking about. It comes kind of in layers. That balance is quite nice. Where, during the mid game you have to start doing critical hits with your silent weapons in order to take these straggling characters out, or these outliers, right? So it becomes a little bit deeper to do it, which is quite nice. And then towards the end, you'll have to use basically all the tricks in the book if you want to take anybody out on the outskirts.
Right on. That's actually that's interesting in that I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and just I've been thinking about how like familiar routine I fell into with that game, as far as I can sort of feel where the game wants me to improvise and just sort of roll with it if things escalate and go badly. But if you're very careful, you can make a very repetitive stealth routine in that game, picking off people one by one and then going for the biggest, toughest person for last. I'm going to move on to another question, which is XCOM is sort of infamous in some ways for how it communicates hit percentages, and it's kind of I think it's considered a positive element in some respects because players don't seem to be averse to the idea of missing a 90% shot, at close range. Like you stand there and fire the big gun and the alien doesn't get hit. I noticed that hit percentages were a thing in this game. What did you learn about communicating those values to players? And I know there's some lies, like XCOM is lying to you sometimes about percentages, and a lot of tactical games will actually do that to you. What did you learn about that from your own perspective, and how did that affect your design decisions?
Well, first of all, of course, we're also cheating behind the scenes because people do not understand percentages very well. So a 75% shot here is a bit higher, right?
Yeah.
And we'll also do a few tricks on the AI side where if they hit you, they'll actually have less chance next time and such, so that you don't get into these streaks of the enemy feeling super powerful just because they got a lucky run.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do a couple of these things, specifically around 50%, right? I think 25 to 50% is where people are. You shouldn't be taking those shots, really. You shouldn't be taking 25% shots in an XCOM game, but people expect 25% shots to be a hit.
Mm-hmm.
So one way of doing that, then, of course, is to add a bit when you miss, for instance. So we have a few of those tricks going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it doesn't deter anything from the game. We added more along the line where we felt it was needed. It's better that the game feels fair than that it is fair, right?
That's actually the hardest thing to do in these games, is to make them feel fair.
Yeah, and Lee was also very early on with the percentages. He wanted it to be. We looked at Mario Rabbit versus Rabbits, I think.
Yeah, I think they do 150.
Yeah,
they're more extreme than we are.
Yeah, but we went with the system in between.
Yeah, we went for like an in-between system where we round the numbers up to the nearest 25%. I think it is. Yeah, because it just feels a bit more. For me personally, when I'm playing, it just feels a bit more easier to predict what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
A 75% is not. It's not. To me, it feels not guaranteed. It's still a bit of a gamble.
Mm-hmm.
50% feels like we know what a 50-50 is. It's a complete gamble.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to hit 25, that just feels like it's going to miss.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm playing and I'm getting an 87% chance to hit, that's a little bit more difficult for me to get a feel for what that number means to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking my shot.
How do you so it's kind of interesting that there's two calculations going on there. There's the first calculation that I assume just checks, it checks enemy level, it checks your player's level, it checks the player's gear. Then there's a rounded number that's presented to the player. What internally do you think makes for like from a, I guess, thinking about making those formulas, what do you think makes a good version of those formulas from the dev side before it's presented to the player?
Oh, that's a good question. But I think rounding was a little bit wrong because what we did is basically we stacked it. So all your bonuses are on like a 25%. So a low cover will give you 25%, while a high cover will give you 50, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of stepping, instead of going with 10% or some certain angle, trying to be a little bit more binary so that players will learn that, okay, I'm going to take 75% shots or try to get 100, because in our game it's quite easy to get 100. As long as you flank an enemy, you will most likely be getting it. We do have range in there, but that's what we wanted. We wanted players to figure out how to get 75 or 100 shots every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then try to be pretty harsh on the other end so that, I'd rather give you 0% than 5%. So to speak, because we don't want you taking 5% shots anyway.
Yeah, it was like to try and make the game feel a lot more fair, where we want to reward players for doing good tactical moves a lot more than other tactical games will do. So if I pull off a really, really good tactical move and I'm flanking someone, but then I only get a 82% chance to hit and I miss, it doesn't feel like I'm being rewarded for doing some good tactical play. So in our game, if you do a good tactical play, you do some good positioning, which the stealth is directly feeding into that, then you'll be rewarded pretty highly.
Nice.
It is a tricky one that we haven't solved completely here, which is teaching players what flanking means. Because it's the same rules as XCOM uses, which basically means you need to be on the same, like behind the grid point that the cover is on. But that since we have quite lush environments that look almost biological at times, it can be really hard to communicate that. And we opted to go for the let's see if you switch to combat here, making sure that we show the line of fire and kind of your percentages to all the characters in a preview from any tile that you want to move to, and then that way you could kind of explore where you would get the best advantage. I'm not sure what's in this demo actually, because we've been adding to that lately. So let's see it when you get into combat.
This gets really interesting because I totally thought I was boned here, but
but you actually now you have this guy behind the house,
and I used a silent weapon. Yeah.
But that was a tense moment, right?
Yeah.
I've been caught there as well.
I liked how he like came to look for me, and I was just kind of like panicked into a corner, and I was like, what do I do? Fire, 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 and it worked out okay.
Yeah, you should be careful there because the boar doesn't have a silent weapon at the moment, right? So.
Yeah, that's you can see I stuck him here to get ready to fight while I move my duck around.
Yep.
I guess that brings us back to the environment a little bit, which is what do you think helped you like move from the vision of exploring the woods and finding random buildings in the woods to taking those woods and making them locales that could make for these interesting decisions? Because it's sort of easy, I think, nothing in game development is easy. What am I saying? It is one thing to make, a lush rendered scene that's interesting to explore, and then it's another to say, like, that one bit of cover out there, you can't see me pointing, what am I doing? But that one box on the right side of the screen right now is its own strategically paced bit of cover that changes the flow of gameplay here. Like, what's that process like, moving from, like, the sort of high level to the low level here?
Yeah, it's difficult to explain. Just a lot of playtesting. It's the only way you can do it. I mean, this map that you're seeing right now, I must have played this 1,000 times. And every time I play, I adjust the covers around, and then I play again. And then I'm like, this would have been so much better if I had a cover here. Then I adjust the covers around, and just keep doing that process over and over again.
Yeah, because it's... I remember when we generated trees, for instance, at some point we had a distance that we wanted to put them so that you could always get a cover, but that doesn't work to make an interesting space in itself. So I think, there's no shortcut there. You really have to play it. I mean, there are some ground rules, I guess you learned after a while that, you need to have 4 tiles between high cover walls in buildings or such.
And sometimes it's fun to remove covers from an area as well. So the player has to make completely different decisions. Maybe they have to make a sprint move to get to the good covers at the other side. But the only real way of doing this is through just a lot of playtesting.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Right on. That
I was watching that video.
Yeah, I got lucky with that. I mean, I had this under control. There's only one of them.
Yeah.
Steak Applebee's would like to know, what were your main takeaways from the beta period for this game?
That it is a large game to balance.
Yes. I think it's the hardest thing I've ever done. Is to balance this game.
I mean, it is. It's about 15 hours of gameplay, even for us that know the game very well, to try and get through it. And of course, like we discussed earlier, we changed the balance for the stealth for one. So like how many units you can take out, and then you can take them out if you use the correct strategies, right? So lots of balancing, and the really tricky to balance the whole way because of the amount of time, right? It takes to.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that have hit us from the public demo that went out was the response. It's taken me by surprise how much people are enjoying the game, because we're completely closed we're completely closed to the game, so we can't see it anymore. We're completely blind to it, and there's the old saying with game developers: we only deal with problems. That's our entire day, is just problems all day long. We never take a step back to go, oh, wait a minute, maybe we're actually building something that people really like.
Yeah, but it was for balancing, because we have two different, we get two completely different answers from two different people, right? We have Rui, the CEO of Funcom. He's a really hardcore XCOM fan, and he's constantly been telling us to make it harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
The other side, we have the people that are not hardcore XCOM players, right? And they're all like, it's way too hard. It's way too hard. And then you have, because we went with this option that you can take people out silently, that became another one. Not just balancing a fight, but if you don't take anybody out, that fight will be very hard. If you take as many as possible out, it might become too easy. So that's been a tricky one.
Have you had to? Oh, sorry. No, go for it, Lee.
A top tip for any game designers out there: stick all your numbers in a big Excel sheet and make some formulas in there. So if you change one number somewhere, you can see what it does to the rest of the game.
Yeah.
That's my approach with this, and it's the only way I've been able to get on top of it, I would say. And if I change how much damage the crossbow does over here, I can roughly see what it does to the end game.
We've finally become old enough to praise Excel.
Yeah. I know. we were making fun of Skype earlier, but I think the number one thing is Excel. I think that's the one thing I've learned from game designers is Excel is wonderful. Skype is nightmarish.
Yeah, but it's true. I think that was probably the biggest thing we went through during the beta period. Now was just how large the game was. It's always hard to say how many gameplay hours you have as well, of course, early on. And we were playing this in different segments, calling it like you would, the start of the game, the mid game, and the end game, and we were just playing those segments, but never doing that full run. You want to do it as early as possible, we always do it too late. And in our case, that meant we had a lot of hours to balance all of a sudden. So maybe we should have, I don't know what we should have changed, to be honest. It's just a large game.
Lee, I wanted to follow up on the kind of one that you halfway talked about it with an Excel spreadsheet with formulas that can change. What did you find yourself making new formulas as development went on? Like, I assume you had some sort of like core balancing formulas and then made things that were tuned for, specific gameplay instances. But after that beta period, we were sort of like, okay, I need to solve this tiny problem. That means I need to create this kind of formula to create something more, that doesn't, it lets me not have to change all the base values and lets you be more flexible.
Not as such. The Excel sheet I've been using for most of production has not changed much. It always changes the numbers that's in it. And the biggest thing, the hardest thing that's been to balance is the stealth. Making sure it's not too powerful, and also making sure it's not weak at the same time. And also making sure it doesn't get boring halfway into the game. Yeah.
Right on. Grabbing a question from chat, Magravalp would like to know, do scrap and enemies respawn so that players can grind? I noticed while I'm in the zone, nothing respawns, but I didn't return to any zones during the demo. And I guess the follow-up question I would ask is, why or why not did you implement grinding in this game so that players could just sort of keep gathering stuff?
We didn't.
Yeah.
We early on we had many meta loops that we tried out, and grinding in such a slow-paced game as XCOM turn-based, we felt was probably not the right way to go. So that also, that makes it harder to balance in a way as well. Yeah. Because if you have the grinding element, of course, that becomes a little bit of a self-balancing act from the player, how much they want to, level up before doing something. But we cut that. It was quite early.
It was quite early. We did some tests with it, and it wasn't really working.
No, we felt it was not the route to go, and instead try to. What we have though instead is we have optional maps So there are forks in the road when you move around the map here, and there are certain almost hidden areas that you don't need to do for the story, or you don't need to do to progress, but you can come back to. So if you skip them and went further in the game and it starts becoming too hard, then of course you could return to them at that point. So that's kind of our grind, or those extra non story.
Yeah, and we found as well that without having the grind in there, it allowed us to get the balance in very, very tight. So we can balance it so you only just have enough med packs, you only just have enough scrap. And because in a game like this, your resources really matter in the tactical side. If you can grind for unlimited med packs, then the tactical side of the game becomes a bit meaningless. There's no like skill-based decision making anymore. There's no like, oh, I can't really use. I should save my grenade and do something else because I can just have. I've only got 2 of them and they're really expensive, and that kind of gameplay disappears if you can just keep grinding the maps over and over again.
Right on. We got a few more questions in chat. Thank you, folks like Cal Cloven and Everpeer for checking in and asking questions with us. You guys did say it was just to answer Cal Cloven's question really quick. You said it was 50 hours of gameplay is what you were pitching?
No.
50?
15 is our current speed run here, I think.
Oh, that's the speed run. That's the speed run speed for 15. Got it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's basically QA.
Yeah, that's the QA speed.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can't put another, but we've always been saying minimum 15 hours, right? For that. So that's the only thing we can say. Then, of course, if you fail a couple of more bigger battles, it might take you a couple of more hours right off the bat, right? Because there are some quite big fights. Toward the later parts of the game.
I'm actually really excited about a battle we're about to check out as we close out the stream today. After picking up Selma here, there's a really interesting battle up the hill that was the first time that I saw you guys spawn in new enemies, and at first I panicked because I was like, oh no, that's way more than I expected. And then I realized I could deal with it, and I was like, that was one of the coolest feelings I've had in a strategy game, is always, oh no, and then wait, I can handle it. That movement from the first emotion to the second emotion is a really good one. So after I recruit Selma here, we'll get to look at that. We are coming to the end of our hour here. Thank you really quick to our developer friends for joining us today. We've got time to take more questions. We are doing our best to answer questions from players, but we are hoping to learn more things about making games. So we're going to be pivoting. We're going to be making sure all of our questions are game development related going forward. Question for Lee and David. Licensed properties are kind of an interesting paradox for game developers. On the one hand, they are an opportunity to attract, an existing player base or fan base. And on the other hand, they incur both costs and expectations as you move into development. What was your experience going from IO Interactive and sort of having more control over Hitman and what Hitman is to going indie, going solo, and working on even if it was a lesser known internationally license, it was still one that had some expectations with it.
Yeah, what to say? Actually, we were lucky enough to get quite free hands on this one, in what we wanted to do with it. In this case, and of course, maybe that's partly because it isn't a big international IP yet.
Yes.
So we were blessed by that, and the guy that made the original pen and papers back in the day, he was actually one of the first backers and investors as well, so he was really on board with it. So it's
been really smooth.
Yeah, it's been really smooth actually.
Yeah.
In our case, I don't know if that will apply to everybody, right? There is, of course, like you say, that trade-off otherwise. But I think we showed what we wanted to do very early on, very honestly, this type of gameplay and all that. And got that okayed early on, and then it has been smooth sailing for us. So yeah, it's maybe not the right people to answer that question.
Well, I mean, this, by the way, that moment creeped me out right there so much. Like, what is moving overhead? Like, what
I'm
could
actually,
be?
I'm so happy that you said this was the first like real encounter you felt, because that was the idea.
Yeah.
This is the road fight, which has been called. It was supposed to be the first challenge you would get in the game,
Mm-hmm.
and so we've not now towards the end of the project, but towards the middle of the project, I think we were balancing the game around this fight.
Yeah,
it's important, right, to have some sort of. This was like the first fight that's meant to carry on for a little bit longer.
Yeah, this was really cool. Like watching this. The fact that this butcher. You're about to see me take him out right now, but midway through the fight, I don't know if we'll have time to show it because I kept playing for past the hour that we have today. The med bot that is around the corner over there ran up and resurrected that butcher midway through the fight, and I was just like, "What? It's like I dealt with him. What are you doing?"
Yeah, we have quite a few interesting enemies that you come across, so that changes the fight dynamic a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That was also one of our key game design things that we wanted to do. Make sure that you have to make a choice which enemy, and maybe in the middle of the fight having to switch that choice, right? That's kind of what the medbot does. If he goes running for somebody, if he went for this axe ghoul here, maybe you would be okay with that because it's just an axe ghoul. But if he went to heal a stronger character, you'll have to deal with him.
Yeah.
Kind of a wrench in, right?
Yeah. I play another strategy game that I talk about way too much on these channels called X-Wing Miniatures, which is a tabletop game, and the concept of focus fire is something I've been thinking about constantly for that game, and to see another game sort of like force you to make choices about that is a really good design thing to see.
We used to play X-Wing as well.
Yeah, we used to play a lot actually.
Hey, you should come back for 2.0. It's fun.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we should pick up. Yeah, we should pick it up.
Oh, FFG owes me something. I don't know. See, getting game designers hyped about X-Wing is my new brand. I guess as we move out, this is sort of just is there anything I guess you all have been thinking about, like you sort of been running up to other game designers at the bar in this magical Swedish bar where everyone from Ubisoft to DICE is hanging out. Is there anything you've been running up and sort of telling other game devs like, hey, like we learned this, either striking out on our own or going into a genre we didn't know anything about before? Is there anything you all have been saying that you think other devs would like to hear?
Oh,
that's a difficult one.
That's well, yeah, we've been saying loads, but I don't know if you can say it on camera.
Yeah.
Swearing is allowed.
No, we haven't. I don't know if there've been that many curveballs for us this time around when it comes to the actual game development.
Maybe biting off a bit too much.
Yeah, but that's always the case.
We always do that.
No, and then you come into on the technical side with Unreal. We've actually been reasonably pleased with Unreal. You can say we had we did a late upgrade, which you never should, right? To the engine, which caused us a bit of a headache towards the end. But other than that, it's also been reasonably smooth sailing. But if you do work in Unreal, make sure you. If you're having problem with loading times, make sure you handle that early on. That's one that came back to bite us because we had a bit of technical issues after upgrading. That certain things would not work in the same way, and then having to redo a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Just kind of this is not necessarily the most brilliant question to ask. Oh my God, here's where the respawn happened, and I just was like, what? If I
she's the hornblower.
I do love actually the horn he has on his head, on his back of his pack. I was going to say something I've been hearing from devs a lot lately with both Unreal and Unity. Oh God, yeah, poor Selma. I struggle a little bit with. I did win this fight, for the record. I did not die and have to do it again. So whatever you see today, know that it works out okay. I was going to ask, I know that a lot of developers working in Unreal and Unity are utilizing the store's marketplace to get a lot of like sort of pre-baked and pre-built tools and plugins to help improve their gameplay experience, their game making experience. Did you all rely on any tools from that setting, and did they help you out at all?
Yes, and that's actually one thing. The marketplace works really well for the let's say the asset side, I think. But I think it's very risky if you go into more complicated blueprints, because that's one where it might not be tested that well, and then we ran into that with upgrading as well, right? That maybe the support had been dropped, or you were using it in a way that the original developers didn't think about, and if you hadn't built it yourself, it might take more time, right? So I think when it comes to, I mean, plugins, yeah, of course, if it's solid C++ stuff, I don't think it's a problem. But we did have some problems with some blueprints that we had bought early on that got used in the game. That took a lot of time to fix in the end. So I think you should be careful when you buy, because a lot of people when they do assets on the store, they like to show it off, so they make really complicated materials, for instance, which you can't really use in the end, because I mean we're shipping this on console, so we can't have massive super smart materials everywhere. That would ruin performance, right?
But it's also doing more than we actually need to use.
Yeah, so we were pretty adamant early on, at least, where if we bought something, we would actually put it in a different project and then just move stuff over to force ourselves to kind of rebuild materials. We'll use the textures, we'll use the meshes and such, to kind of force ourselves to do it, so that we wouldn't end up loaded with all this, because that's probably the biggest problem you could run into, that you bloat the game because it's so easy.
Yeah. That's the danger with the blueprint scripting in general, I would say, that you need to kind of keep it clean, otherwise you end up with a mess where, you have a lot of messy blueprint scripting, handling important stuff in the game that,
Yeah, we've had a few now lately as well, right, where I think everybody works in Unreal runs into this at some point, where you make some blueprints early on when you're prototyping, and then you kind of forget that those blueprints are not up to shipping spec. They might not support the save games in the correct way or all that stuff, right? So you need to kind of keep track of that, and if you bring in too many blueprints from the marketplace, I think that might become an issue for you.
Right on. It is here in California. The sun is rising. It is about 8 o'clock. We are running out of time, sadly, to continue this conversation. I will, before we get out of here, throw a couple questions from chat in just to help you all out. But before we, sort of start wrapping up, Air Viper would just quickly like to know: will there be a new game plus on launch, or is that something you all are looking at later?
There's no plans for launch, but we're looking at a lot of things for later.
Cool.
New Game Plus, remind me.
It's this thing where you can have, I think it's making the game.
Yeah, it's like a nightmare mode.
Yeah. The nightmare mode. Yeah, actually
more accurately, it's where you run through the game again with stuff you already have from your first run.
Yeah, and with more. No, it's not something we've planned right now. We did include the Iron Man mode from the start, though, which has been a discussion back and forth if we wanted to do that, because it is really, really, really tough. And but we felt if people want to punish themselves, they should be able to.
Right on. Cal Cloven actually asks, how is Funcom wants to know how has Funcom been helping you out on this game, and if you all have any planned DLC after launch.
Yeah, we can't really talk about launch, post-launch plans yet.
Because it hasn't happened yet.
Sorry, well. But Funcom's been really good. They've been helping us with the marketing, QA, some development support as well, where we've been borrowing programmers from them to help out with UI and localization. And they've been helping us with a lot of the wrapping that goes on around the game. Mm-hmm. So QA stuff, localization stuff, marketing stuff, looking after people on forums and all these kind of things, which is a lot of game developers tend to forget about, but it's really important when you want to launch a game.
Yeah, especially we would never have localized the game if we didn't have Funcom, because that is a huge thing to do a lot of times. Especially we have a lot of voice acting and we have a lot of menus. It would have been completely unfeasible for us.
Right on.
And yeah, like you said, they have their QA, of course, and then being able to borrow a few programmers for a while has also been a blessing.
Yeah.
Nice. With that, I think it's time to pleasantly wrap things up. Thank you, Lee, David, and Callie, so much for joining us. If they've got any more questions about making the game, where should they ask them?
There's the official Funcom forum where they can go there. Ask the questions. I think it's probably the best place.
Yeah,
Nice.
or yeah, I guess you're free to send us stuff on the Bearded Ladies Facebook page as well, but we actually handle that one, so we might not be super quick to answer since we're kind of in release mode here.
Yeah. Well, speaking of release mode, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
No problem.
No problem.
I should also say, if you said it's sunny in California now, I think we just got our first snow. Somebody was shouting.
Ah!
I think it's about
I'm jealous. Oh, I love snow. I mean, in theory, I have a mountain just like a few hours east that I can go to for snow, but I keep forgetting to do that. But it's gonna rain tonight. It's gonna rain tonight in California finally.
Congratulations, California.
We need it, although it might cause mudslides. So I don't know. Anyway, thank you all for joining us today on the GDC Twitch channel. Thank you for joining us so early. Mutant Year Zero launches on December 4th, or I should say Mutant Year Zero Road to Eden. You can check it out on Steam, Xbox, and PS4. For us at GDC, we would love it. For those of you who are not familiar with the channel, if you were to click the follow button, if you're a person who likes talking to game developers, learning about how games get made, what you'll find out is that we do a lot of streams with them now, talking to different devs about how their games are. What's really cool is GDC's coming up in March, and we have more and more speakers, more and more talks confirmed for next year's show. And what's cool is we are planning to start talking to a lot of them this year. So we're going to be talking to them about their games as their games get made. Usually we're doing, we're trying to check out new games. We're talking to developers about games that are very interesting or very unique, or like Mutant Year Zero, but also by talking to GDC speakers, we have an opportunity to revisit games from last year. So we don't quite know yet who we're getting, but we plan to bring them to you and ask them interesting questions on your behalf. While I'm at it, if you're interested in GDC yourself, you can always scroll down and click the button in order to get your own pass for GDC. And apparently in chat, I don't know if Callie Cloven works for Funcom, but they would like everyone to know that if you're interested in this game, check out the Funcom stream happening in 1 hour for Mutant Year Zero. They say there is a, quote, surprise coming. I don't know what that means. I don't know if Cal works for Funcom or not, but in case you are at home or interested, you should definitely go check it out. David's looking, casting a knowing look.
He knows something we don't.
I hope the surprise is a nice surprise and not a sad surprise.
I think we know what it is.
I think we know what it is, yeah.
All right. With that, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, such a delay.